of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. On Parakram Diwas, we are gathered here to commemorate his contribution in nation building. 23rd January is also now marked as the start of India's celebration of Republic Day. To discuss his legacy as a leader, as a statesman, as an institution builder, and to understand a leader's impact on the society in giving us future vision for the nation, we are joined today on Netaji Jayanti with our chief guest, Shri Meenakshi Lekhi ji, Minister of State for External Affairs and Culture of India. She is a member of parliament from New Delhi parliamentary constituency in the 16th and the 17th Lok Sabha from BJP. Our keynote speaker, Lieutenant General A B Shivane, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, retired, a former consultant to Ministry of Defense and former Director General of Indian Army's Mechanized Forces. And our special guest, K Annamalai ji, a political leader currently serving as the President of BJP Tamil Nadu, a former IPS officer of 2011 batch, and an IIM Lucknow alumnus. Also, he's the founder of We the Leaders Foundation. After our special guest address, we would also have a brief Q&A session at the end. We are also joined by Shri Sanjay Pulipakaji, a senior fellow for research programs and strategic neighborhood, Delhi Policy Group. His erudite scholarly work focuses on Indian foreign policy, East Asian security issues, Indian-US relationship, and Indian politics. Now, we would ask Shri Shijit Datta, Assistant Professor, Director of Center for Civilization Studies, Rashtam, Rishihud University, to share his introductory remarks on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose life. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Namaskar. It fills me with thrill and gratitude to share a few notes on the Mahakshatriya Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, whose birth anniversary we are celebrating today through this August event organized by our university. It is a pleasant coincidence that the very name of our university, Rishihud University, comes from the immortal utterances of Swami Vivekananda, whose words and deeds had shaped the life and destiny of Subhash Chandra. In his autobiography, Bharat Pathik, or the Indian Pilgrim, Netaji warmly acknowledged his debts to not only Swami Vivekananda, but also Swamiji's Guru, Sri Ramakrishna Paramhamsa for the formative role they played in his life, thought, and the building of his nationalist consciousness. The personality of Subhash Chandra Bose, whom we fondly and reverently call by the epithet Netaji, had fascinated both the common man as well as the greats of his time. This fascination and popular fondness are both acknowledged and immortalized in the field of literature by no less a personage than Rabindranath Tagore, the greatest poet of modern India, who had dedicated his highly celebrated dance drama, Tashet Desh, or The Land of Cards, to Netaji Subhash Chandra. On today's occasion, when we are celebrating Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's 125th birth anniversary, which is since last year being fittingly celebrated countrywide as Parakram Diwas, I think it will be useful to try and understand why Tagore particularly chose Netaji for the dedication of this particular literary work of his. If one reads Tashet Desh either in its original or in translation, one would notice that it is about a young prince who sets sail for the unknown foreign shores with the goal of discovering something new and thus liberating people from the shackles of mindless impediments to freedom. The parallel with Netaji's life here is striking, despite the fact that the publication of Tagore's dance drama and its dedication to Subhash Chandra occurred almost 3 years prior to his daring escape to Germany via Afghanistan by fooling the British guards who kept Subhash Chandra under surveillance 24/7 while he was kept under house arrest at his Elgin Road place in Kolkata. In his dedicatory message to Subhash, which can be found in the page preceding the opening song of Tashet Desh, Tagore writes in Bangla, and I translate it here into English, quote, Dear Subhash Chandra, remembering the vows that you have taken to breathe new life into the heart of the country, I dedicate the play Tasher Desh to you, unquote. Tagore had the poetic foresight to paint his dramatic protagonist in the colors of Subhash Chandra's mission through multiple countries and continents to breathe new life into not only the heart of India, but specifically to the Indian national freedom movement by forging vital links and alliances with all the anti-British forces during the turbulent days of the Second World War. This was a unique feat in the realm of strategic affairs, which holds a special significance due to the fact that Netaji was functioning as the supreme leader of a free Indian government. And this brings us to today's occasion, where we will listen to our esteemed guests talking about the importance of decisive and wise leadership in the realm of strategic affairs and the specific contribution of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in this realm. Thank you.
Thank you, Shrijit, for your introductory remarks on Bose's life and history. We will now request our chief guest, Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi, Minister of State for External Affairs and Culture of India, to address the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, for having me over for such a honored and reverent, full of reverence event, because we all are participating in one of our special, very, very special days as India is celebrating 75th anniversary of its independence. It is also celebrating 126th birth anniversary of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, the brave son of Ma Bharati, who knew no impediments when it came to the freedom movement, dreamt of independent India and gave freedom struggle a new direction. And that new direction, which developed and awakened a consciousness that would tear the imperialist forces and the darkness of slavery through and through, and change the mindset of people who were so overpowered by the imperialist forces. And he challenged it all by simplicity of his words when he said that I will not beg for freedom, but I will take it. Now imagine what a challenge these words would have been to the powers of those period which controlled half the globe. And when the chapters of Netaji's history will be read and reread and have been reread, we all come across that this man was a person with rare qualities, which showed the way for the freedom struggle. His thoughts and endeavors had earned a distinctive place in the liberation cause, because whatever be the discourse after the independence, after 1947, and even at that point in time, the pliant leadership was trying to decide in a certain way. But this person had taken up the course which was needed for those times to awaken that consciousness and ask people that, give me blood and I will give you freedom. Now imagine, to withstand that kind of pressure, which is tiding against the tide, against the mightiest of the whoever, emancipating India out of the yaw, the kind of strong determination that this person, this leader had displayed at that time, I can just imagine that the kind of life, the kind of sacrifices. And when Tasher Desh is mentioned before me, I can only say he had all the possible opportunities to live like a prince, but he chose not to live like one. He chose to be out in the open and serve Ma Bharati and take help from whoever it had to be taken from. And when we look at him, we also know that the waging of the war of freedom or freedom struggle wholeheartedly had its own implications. And thus, give me blood and I will give you freedom was another war cry with which he generated that kind of enthusiasm amongst the depressed gentry of that time, which had given up the idea of freedom. And he also forewarned people that freedom determines and will be determined by the amount of sacrifices we make. Unfortunate part of the history is that more than 50%, 60% of his army ended, I mean, they all lost their lives while entering India via Kohima. And yet, that sacrifice is not counted in the freedom movement. So, total strength of the uh, army was close to 60,000, less than 60,000, 58, 59,000. And out of which 26,000 or so, or 27, 28,000 people had died. And they are not even remembered in the modern army. Now imagine if you put this figure as per the figure, not to undermine any sacrifice. Every sacrifice for the nation and every sacrifice for the nation building is to be recognized. My only grievance is that when these people lost their lives for the freedom of India, that recognition should have been accrued to them. That's the only point I'm making. Because post independence, the kind of wars we have fought, close to 25,000 army soldiers, our soldiers have sacrificed for the nation. And at that point in time, close to 28,000 people had sacrificed. And all these names should have been commemorated. All these names should have been written in letters of gold. And people who took away, because this fact also nobody knows, that people, when attacked Hussainiwala, they took away the bust of Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru, which was made of gold. And today we have displayed those figures in another metal. But my point is, these factors of history are never displayed to us. This history needs to be told to people so that all those who get derailed in life, get motivated by the wrong ideas, need to be motivated by the right philosophy. And these personalities, these heroes are the heroes. Their charisma has to run through the centuries, and generations after generation has to look up to them. So his determination to go against the tide is something which is for display, and anyone can, even if anyone, even his most celebrated critics cannot go against the fact that this man stood against the tide, and he showed the resoluteness to uproot the British insubordination, and thus traveled to Germany, had a work with Japanese, and whoever he could get across to, and the motivation was not to enroll himself with those philosophies, but the motivation was to free the country of his birth, and that is what I call real Desh Bhakti, because the morality of the entire Desh Bhakti movement has to be against the ones who are challenging your freedom. And thus he also happened to mention that the freedom for Indians meant a different kind of freedom. The liberation was liberation of the soul, where people wanted to rise above lust, greed, and those kinds of activities. But freedom here meant political freedom. Freedom here meant beyond social bondage. And thus the freedom, the concept of freedom, which had to be understood by the people of that time, he framed it. He framed that particular concept absolutely in the most decisive manner, which could be translated easily through the communications which people had to come across to. And when I think of him as a leader, I look at that time frame, and I will say, that was a time frame when women did not, as a woman, I mean, as a woman, you respect men who respect women. So as a woman, I feel that was the time when British, who were the most powerful political force of their time, they did not recognize women as even individuals who could enter into agreements, or who could uh, individual who could be recognized as a person, as individual. And there was a different kind of struggle. Now here is a man coming from a nation which was a slave nation and had undergone a whole lot of transformation in the negative manner because of 1,000 years or 800 plus years of slavery that this country had seen. And coming from that point of view, he raised Rani Jhansi Regiment. He talked about people from every caste, religion, or uh, uh, you know, any format he could think of. He was above all this, and the only purpose, the only goal was to free India. And thus, in terms of strategic affairs, in the realm of strategic affairs, I think this is a remarkable example. Remarkable example because as a strategy, it was important to build India, which was beyond all these things, which I think a work I would say is still in progress. We are still struggling against many inbuilt biases, and thus I would say he was one person who showed the way, who was the leading light of his times, and as a master strategist, did not hesitate to take help from whoever the help was needed. And this was his ethic, the ethical and spiritual ideas, uh, as mentioned before me by Mr. Datta, that the entire persona was of a ethical living and a spiritual ideas which were guiding him through and through, which is completely in consistency with the Indian culture and civilizational ethos. So if we again look at him and dissect his life, we come to know that discipline, regulation of power, and managerial capacities were in plenty, and which keeps manifesting at every aspect of his life, especially when national security was at was the challenge. And today also, when I'm trying to replicate that time period with today's time period, I feel the fragile borders and non-traditional security threats which keep happening to us is still a challenge. So his ideas need to be thought over, getting people together, getting the thought processes consolidated, so that the uncompromising endeavor to combat such challenges can be met efficiently. And Netaji, I believe, I mean, I'm sure, like me, there are millions whose hero he happens to be. He continues to lead India, and I would say New India, as talked about, as the power being consolidated around that idea. The prime ministers repeatedly talked about it, and when prime ministers mentioned the idea of India, the idea of India's nationalism, where he mentions that idea of India's nationalism is neither narrow nor selfish and not even aggressive. So idea is inspired by the values of Satyam Shivam Sundaram. This is precisely the quote which Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had given. And he remains an embodiment of valor and courage, ideals, energy, austerity. I think every leader needs to be full of these aspects, and thus these become very, very important. And when we are serving Mother India, when we are doing our duty, that duty can be best performed when we keep remembering Netaji's sacrifice, and he continues to be an inspiration for all of us. And every decision of Free India, um, every step that he took to shake the imperialist powers, and every step that the forces he gathered to shake the imperialist powers, and when he went abroad, that consciousness which he awakened. I think even while staying outside the country, he strengthened the country, and that was the force of Azad Hind Fauj. I would, say that while concluding my remarks, I would say that when we are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav as declared by the Prime Minister of our country, and further declared 23rd Jan as the Parakram Diwas, and is going to be celebrated in the most grandeur of the manner, and showing our government's commitment to the memories of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. His traditions of sacrifice, valor will continue to inspire the generations after generation, and the pride in our experiences and heritage, I think, will get rerouted in our existence. With these words, I would like to say thank you, everyone. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you so much, Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi ji, for enlightening us about the efforts that we must make to decolonize our efforts, and also restructuring our history to understand the Netaji's role in society and strategic affairs. We would now request our keynote speaker, Lieutenant General Retd A B Shivane ji, a scholar warrior, a tankman, to address our audience on this special occasion. Thank you.
Sagar, may I take your leave?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for addressing our audience.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Ashok ji.
Thank you very much. Pleasure hearing you.
Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste.
Jai Hind, and greetings to all. Thank you very much for this invite. In fact, it's an honor to be speaking on a national hero of the stature of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose on the occasion of Parakram Diwas 2022. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today is a day of remembrance. It's also a day of reflection, and it's a day of inflection in the proud history of India's freedom struggle. On this day, if I may say, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was not born alone, but the idea India a reality was also born. And the vision of India of the future was also born. And that is symbolic of this day. He said, and I quote, "We should have but one desire today, the desire to die so that India may live, the desire to face a martyr's death so that the path of freedom may be paved with the martyr's blood." I mean, look at the spirit, look at the nationalism, look at the focus of a hero who is fighting all odds but determined of his mission. Friends, as you're aware, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was possibly the greatest hero, and he stood in front of the mightiest power then and said, "I will not ask you for your freedom. I will take away freedom." That was the guts, courage, conviction of a hero who had the tricolor dawned on him all over. So a million salutes to Netaji and Azad Hind Fauj. I will quickly recap my thoughts of Netaji and his role in the freedom struggle, and Netaji and his impact on the strategic affairs of modern India. Let me begin by saying, most respectfully, if our beloved Gandhiji is the father of the nation, then most deservingly, our hero, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, is the liberator and the godfather of the nation. I mean, no disrespect to anyone, but I just want to highlight the important role played by Subhash Chandra Bose and his brand of fiery, revolutionary patriotism, which ignited the spark of the dying embers of Quit India movement, which was being crushed from 42 to 45. But it was Netaji which brought in a change. He ignited fire into the Indian freedom movement, while non-violence as a struggle had its impact on the masses. But remember, the uniform fraternity of Indians were kept isolated by the British in the army. But it was the spirit, the success and sacrifices of the Indian National Army under Subhash Chandra Bose and their move towards Imphal, which gave a catalytic inspiration and a reaction to a series of revolts which took place in the February of 1946, starting with the Royal Indian Naval Revolt, where 78 out of the 88 ships revolted. Soon there were demonstrations and strikes by the Royal Indian Air Force, and then the army revolt in Jabalpur. This was the turning point of the British and the most horrific nightmare that sapped their will, forcing them to take a hasty retreat from what was earlier planned by them. And Netaji, in his fiery speech, and I quote, said, "Our motherland is calling. Blood is calling blood. It is blood alone that you can pay the price of freedom. Give me blood, and I will give you freedom." But this fight, like said by the previous speaker, came with an enormous sacrifice that must never be forgotten. From 1857 to 1947, there have been many freedom fighters who have sacrificed their lives and played a major role. And I salute each one of them, and they must never be forgotten. But perhaps unparalleled was in the Indian National Army. In a period of 1943 to 47, a strength which is being quoted from anything from 43,000 to 60,000 strength, 26,000 lives were lost and sacrificed. They were killed in action. And what was the mission? To free India from the British. These lives must be on the roll of honor and must get the due place in letters of gold. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom comes at an immense cost, but retaining the freedom comes at an even greater cost. This is where we need to show our gratitude to the brave soldiers, both past and present, for the comfort we live in today. Again, with due respect, if our beloved Panditji Jawaharlal Nehru ji was the first Prime Minister of divided dominion of India, it was Netaji who was the first Prime Minister of undivided united India when he proclaimed the provincial independent Azad Hind government on 21st of October 1943 and declared a war against the British by organizing the Azad Hind Fauj. It was a nation which was conceptualized. There was the Azad Hind Bank with its own currency. Hindustani was made an official language. There was newspapers and radios in multiple languages communicating to the world the aspirations of freedom, a complete freedom for a nation which was being fought and sought for. Ladies and gentlemen, if the first tricolor for independence was hoisted on the ramparts of Red Fort of the 9th and 14th, 15th August 1947, it must be known that the first tricolor to be hoisted on the Indian soil was on 14th April 1944 by Colonel Shaukat Ali Malik of Indian National Army at Morenga, Kangla at Manipur with the slogan, "Chalo Delhi." This tricolor flew for 3 months on the Indian soil for the first time. Today, when we greet as an army men, when I say Jai Hind, and our soldiers march on the tune of Kadam Kadam Badhaye Chal, Khushi ke Geet Gaye Chal. Ye zindagi hai kaum ki, to kaum se pe lutaye chal. Do not forget, Jai Hind was officially the greeting coined by Indian National Army. And the tune that I have mentioned was the marching tune of Indian National Army. Today, when you see with pride women donning uniform in the 3 services, it gives you an immense pleasure and pride to see that. Do not forget that Azad Hind Fauj had a regiment exclusively of nearly 10,000 women fighters, the Rani Jhansi regiment, who fought shoulder to shoulder, no discrimination. They were brave hearts, they were brave warriors, because warriors have no gender biases. Now, if you look at Netaji and his impact on the strategic affairs of modern India, I think among the principal shapers of India's strategic culture and the ideology of what we call India, I think Netaji's contribution was supreme. Among the idea of India revolved around a more holistic word than independence called Swaraj, which is a more wholesome word, because Netaji termed this Swaraj as political, social, and economic freedom of the nation. That was the vision of this man. He had the clarity of thought and purpose, which was reflected in his mission, which is only the first mission is talked of. We don't talk of the second one very often. But he had twin missions. One, to liberate India from the British rule, its exploitation and oppression. Two, reconstruction of free India with an indigenous character and holistic inclusive growth. Netaji's ideology and the idea of India were based on four basic principles. And he's enunciated them very, very clearly in his various talks and speeches. First was an integral and composite nationalism where nation was above all. Second was a secular outlook, or secularism, wherein being Bharati, all the soldiers are called Bharati. There were no caste, creed, religion, gender. They were Bharatis. And being Bharati was supreme. Third was socialism, which was aimed at creating an egalitarian society of equal status and shared benefit, which is now being termed at Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. And then he realized that India needed a democratic structure wherein the common man could be the agent of change. He clearly identified that eradication of poverty, illiteracy, and disease were the primary concern of young India when it was born. Netaji, if I would say, was both a visionary and a realist. You know, even before the World War II, he had realized that the Treaty of Versailles was a catalyst for another world war to take place. He knew that his motherland could only be liberated if a military campaign was launched from outside. There was no space that was left within to organize an effective military campaign or resistance movement. He also knew that for such a campaign to be launched, he needed support. And the support had to come from those forces which were anti-British. And he looked at Germany and he looked at Japanese. So the far-sightedness of Netaji can be seen in many, many facets, whether it be democracy, whether it be governance. Imagine, he had even envisioned in his speech and in his thoughts the setting up of a planning commission with the emphasis on economy. This was mentioned by him in Haripura session of the conference in 1938, 9 years before the independence. And this has now taken the form of the former planning commission or the Niti Aayog, which we now talk of. That was the visionary. He had enunciated the directive principles of state policy. In a short duration when he was the Congress president, he had issued policy guidelines through a letter for the governance of respective provinces. And these were extracted in our constitution when the directive principles of policy were made. He realized the importance of economy. For him, economic freedom was the essence of social and political freedom. And self-reliance was the mean, today what we call Atmanirbharta. He spoke of the need of a comprehensive, integrated industrial plan, focusing on large-scale industries, communication industries, but integrating at that time the cottage industries and the small industries. He spoke of production and distribution issues. I mean, that was the holistic leader that the nation should be proud of. A military leader, a diplomatic leader, a visionary, and a man of that stature, a transformer who not only got involved and got the Indian National Army into place, but realized the means, the ways, and the aims to achieve freedom. And in his own words, he said, men, money, and material cannot by themselves bring victory of freedom. We must have the motive power that will inspire us for brave deeds and heroic exploits. Here was a man who understood that the three basic pillars of a nation are defense, development, and diplomacy. Here was a man who had the unique amalgamation of the firebrand spirit of a revolutionary, a warrior leader, and a diplomat and administrative skills, which are reflected in his Chanakya-like understanding of the statecraft and diplomacy. I would like to end this with three quotes, which have a lot of meaning today, and particularly in the present day when we have a multitude of threats which we face. The first quote I'd like to mention, Netaji said, the secret of political bargaining is to look stronger than what you really are. He realized winning or losing is in the mind. It's in the cognitive domain. If you behave like a nail, you will be hit like a hammer. Only strength is respected. Second quote, he said, no real change in history has ever been achieved by discussion, implying only power is respected in the real world. That was the realist in Netaji. Third, he said, build a national defense system on such unshakable grounds that never, ever again in the history of time shall we lose our freedom. He clearly brought out that there is a need of capability building, and capabilities take time and threats manifest faster. He indirectly hinted at self-reliance and self-sufficiency and Atmanirbharta. And he clearly brought out the need for a nation to be strong and have a strong defense modernization in place. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would say, a white paper was unrevealed. It was written earlier, a white paper by the British military chiefs of staff. And in that, it came out that the Brits had envisioned, after quelling the Quit India movement, to retain India and the Indian Ocean till around 1960 at least. But it was the series of revolts which I spoke of, and the sacrifices and the fervor that was created in the masses in India because of this, that the British realized that they have to move out the soonest. And this was a fact that had been predicted in July 1943 by Netaji, and later, post-independence, acknowledged by the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee during his visit to India. Ladies and gentlemen, history must be reclaimed. History must be reoriented to unveil the hidden truth, and our unsung heroes must be given a place of pride. The heroes, from the leaders to those 26,000 brave hearts who gave their lives for the nation, for each one of us. Be a proud Indian and value your history. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant General A B Shivane ji, for enlightening us and paying tribute to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's life, especially showcasing his key role in the formation of initial military alliances and as a principal shaper of India's strategic culture. We are happy to be joined by our special guest, Shri K Annamalai ji, a political leader currently serving as a president of BJP Tamil Nadu, a former IPS officer, 2011 batch, and an IIM Lucknow alumnus. Also, he's a founder of We the Leaders Foundation, requesting him to address the event, especially with our young emerging leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagarji, for the kind introduction and for all the other guests who are here. Sagarji, it's a proud privilege to come here and talk about a great personality who is fittingly being remembered today across our country, and especially from last year, when the whole of nation has started celebrating the person who has shown us what true valor is all about. And very specifically, two great speakers have spoken about the great Subhash Chandra Bose ji and his achievements and what he has done. The topic that you have given me is to talk about the role of leader in a society. Normally, I would say a society is itself a combination of many, many individuals who has got various different strengths. And a leader, many a times created out of the society itself, takes a path, takes a leap, and leads a society in a way where it wants to go. And fittingly, we are sitting in a day of Parakram Diwas, the day when Subhash Chandra Bose is being highly revered. He is that kind of a leader. He was born in a very tumultuous time, a very different time. There was a lot of activities happening in the world geographically. The allies and the axis of power, nobody could predict which way the winds will blow. Even in the way the Indian politics was shaping up, many people were not willing to take a risk, step out of their comfort zone. And there was some sort of a passive activity that was happening in the country where everybody wanted to wait and watch. But Subhash Chandra Bose ji decided to take the bull by its horns. That is the specialty about him, in my humble opinion. He decided to take the bull by its horns. He gave everything a try. He wanted to precipitate the process, wanted to fasten the process, wanted to do the process the way that he felt is the fastest to get our country to independence, and truly the Indian way of doing it. And for that, the path that he has taken is a very, very different path. And unfortunately, the history books from 1950 onwards, for a pretty long time, did not put his perspective in the right way for a lot of generations, maybe 3-4 generations, to read accurately what Subhash Chandra Bose ji has done for our country and the activities that he has taken and the path that he has been taken. And now we can very clearly see, with the available literature that is being coming in the open and everything, we could clearly say that Subhash Chandra Bose ji was far ahead of its time. He was a diplomat, he was a master strategist, he was a military historian. He understood how the world events are shaping up. He knew when to ask for help and from whom to take help. And he put everything into his heart and soul to make sure the India's independence would happen right in front of his eyes. So I would say the first quality for a leader who can be in a society and lead the society is to step out of his comfort zone and to see a possible distant future and to take a set of followers towards that future. It is not that followers don't know where to go, but many a times the followers need somebody's direction, a hand-holding for them to be taken there. And Subhash Chandra Bose's life, we could very clearly see he was doing that exactly. when nobody was talking about a kind of an active resistance, a kind of giving it the way the British was giving it, trying to unite all the forces from Japan to Germany, and to trying to make it a kind of a larger force to defeat militarily, to defeat economically, to defeat logically what British were trying to do. Many people were not having that kind of a thought, but he was able to take that thought, which was far ahead of its time. So, and he was able to unite a band of followers, a group of followers. He was able to unite, sell that vision, create that band of army around him, and take them across countries, put them in fight, bring them back to India. That was absolutely uncalled for. This can only happen in that age and time, and even now, when the leader is able to step out of his comfort zone, himself, herself, and take that group along with them. So in the process, you suffer. It is not that leadership is always about lying on a bed of thrones. Nothing comes with comfortness. And Subhash Chandra Bose himself has suffered massively, personally, financially, morally. Wherever they could hit him, they have done it. But still, he kept going. He took losses at face value. He was able to keep his team united. He went one event after the other event, kept that hope. So this, I would say, is the second quality that is very important in a leader, because normally in the general sphere of influence, we start marking events as success or failure. With the current model of teaching, we see life as 0 or 1. You see it as success, you see it as failure, but most of the life that happens between success and failure, where you can't clearly differentiate given number. So that is the time a leader's influence in shaping up that mindset becomes all the more important. Because success is nothing but an event that has happened to your own wishful thinking. Probably the next event might not happen to your wishful thinking, but the series of events might lead to the final destination. And Subhash Chandra Bose ji is a great man, where he was able to operate between that success and failure. He was able to operate between that 0 and 1. And classically speaking, this is what we see lacking with the current leadership models that we discuss. We see in the ground also. Everything we label as a success in the social media world, we start giving attributes to it. And from a great person's life on this Parakram Diwas, the most important thing to take back home is come out of your comfort zone. Don't stick between success and failure. Look at the larger goal. A failure is nothing but one more stepping stone where you stand on it. You see what you have lost, you rebuild it, and then you take the followers to the next journey. And the third, I would say, the most important part of any leader's role in a society is to keep selling that vision. In this age and time when everything keeps changing at a faster pace, what you started a year back and what you are doing now, when you look back, the year itself, the nature itself must have changed a lot of things in front of you. A leader has to steady that course, keep that course ready, and then keep marching towards that vision, the original vision which motivated you and your band of followers to start with. And that is very, very tough in an online world. That is very, very tough in this current world. Now, in this Parakram Diwas also, maybe it is a great day where Subhash Chandra Bose ji is giving us an opportunity to relook at the lives of other great leaders also. I come from Tamil Nadu. So whatever points I've spoken humbly, I could see this very clearly across multiple leaders also. Thanks to our government celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, the 75th year of independence, where a lot of great unspoken leaders who are not very open in the public, they are all being brought to the public domain now. If I can take one great person from Tamil Nadu called Mahakavi Bharatiyar. Mahakavi Bharatiyar lived in a very, very different time. He died in 1921, much before we got independence. But when we go back and look at his life, he was a poet, he was a writer, a very, very fond writer, who could speak 16 languages, starting from French and many of the Indian languages, including Sanskrit. When we look at his life, he was dreaming about India's independence when nobody was believing. He was living in a time and era when we thought independence is 50 years away, independence is 75 years away. But even the small band of followers that Subramania Bharati was able to generate, he was able to sell that vision, how India will be, how Bharat will be, what kind of India will be living, what is the new Bharat that we have to make from the old Bharat. So all this vision he was able to sell, he was able to keep people along with him. But now, maybe 100 years after Subramania Bharati has passed away, when we look at his writing, we could very clearly see, unlike Subhash Chandra Bose, who was very active, who was leading, Mahakavi Bharatiyar was not leading much, but he was pushing people through his writing, he was pushing people through his speeches. Again, if I can go back to other leaders of the same era, maybe 50 years before, V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, whom we call V.O.C., and he was a very big shipping magnate, a very, very rich man. I'm talking of 150 years before now, 150 years back when he was alive in the southern part of Tamil Nadu, when the independence struggle was slowly picking up. I'm even talking about 75 years before independence. That point of time, he firmly believed independence is possible. He firmly believed the British can be driven out of this country. So one way he thought is to collapse the British ships, which was running along the Indian coast, which was ferrying all our goods. And he thought he will build a rival shipping company. He started a Swadeshi navigation company. He started giving a fight to the British ships. He thought through his model, he can fail the British shipping model. He can, through the Swadeshi way, he can defeat British. But he had an idea. But when that idea was 75 years before we got independent, that is 150 years before now. Every time we go back to these great leaders who are not spoken much in our history textbooks, if we take our life, if we read it very keenly, then probably we will understand, yes, they are great leaders. They were far ahead of their times. Probably history was not much kinder to them at that point of time. But when we look at that life with very close scrutiny, there are a couple of things we can see. One, they all came out of their comfort zone. Nobody was sitting in their comfort zone and leading people. Second, they were able to unite their band of followers with a common vision. Third, they were able to adjust their navigation off and on when things did not go their way. Fourth, they never qualified things as a success and failure, but they kept fighting things. The moment they felt things are not going to their liking, they made some adjustments. Subramania Mahakavi Bharatiyar made that adjustment. V.O.C. Chidambaram Pillai made that adjustment. And even the great Subhash Chandra Bose made that adjustment. When you opened up talks with Germany, when you opened up talks with Japan, every time an adjustment was made to face a setback, to accelerate the process, to make sure the dream of Indian independence in front of his eyes, he wanted that much faster. So these are things that is not being very spoken very actively now. But these are areas I felt when we go back, taking inspiration from Subhash Chandra Bose's life, and we go back to this maybe so-called small leaders, but great leaders who are not, the history is not very kind to them, or textbooks is not very kind to them. When we go back and take all their life and very minutely read it, we see this pattern emerging in each of their life. Last but not the least, I firmly believe a leader is somebody who should create more leaders. Maybe the British model or the American model talks about creating more followers. But the Indian model of leadership, especially the Indian independence model of leadership, or especially the Subhash Chandra Bose model of leadership, always talks about creating more leaders. Where the leader is not very insecure about himself. He believes you create a lot of leaders around you, you empower them, you push them, you give them the moral support that is needed, you allow them to fail once in a while and handle them even when they fail. So these leaders are the next generation. They take your cause to a larger audience, so that the seed that is put in can never get burned. They keep it sustaining over the next 50 years, over the next 100 years. They all did it. Subhash Chandra Bose did it by his various regiments. Each of his regiment was named after a particular Indian leader, even if they did not agree to him. When the regiment had a Mahatma Gandhiji's name, even when Mahatma Gandhiji did not agree to Subhash Chandra Bose's methods, but he had each of the person's name as a regiment. And Tamil Nadu, we had some fantastic, even now, we have some people who are alive, who are part of the Indian National Army of Subhash Chandra Bose, who were part of his team when they started coming into Manipur, when the whole of the British were afraid when the next attack will happen, when the next aerial siren will happen, when all of them were there. But he was able to create that small band of leadership inside his old units, because he felt that is the only way it can sustain. It can sustain. So each of this regiment named after a particular great leader, that is the only way it can sustain and take it to the much better level. So all these leaders were never insecure. They always believed the best way to take this process to a larger stage, the best way to keep it together is to create the next generation of leaders. So I think the organizers wanted me to talk a little bit about myself also, and okay, some question. Okay, so when I speak, I will take up the questions that they are asking. And though we would like to speak more about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose ji, but a lot of speakers are speaking, and I don't want to eat into the other speakers' time also. But I am very impressed by his life, and now I am in a political leadership role. I believe I'm trying to take a lot of lessons from his life into what the activities that we are doing. And I was a cop before getting into politics for about 9.5 years. And that's a lesson that being in a uniform will tell you. There is also a great army man who just spoke before me. And the principle of leadership in a uniform is you always put the person who's next to you ahead of yourself. You always put yourself the last. You always come out of your comfort zone. And unfortunately, in the current Indian political setup, that is lacking, because the politics has become very family driven. The politics has become with less principles, and the politics has become more about the short-term interest, less about long-term goals. So this is something which I believe me and a group of other people can bring in, which we are trying to do, which we are trying to create that generation of leaders to see the long-term thing, especially in a state of Tamil Nadu, in a national party, Bharatiya Janata Party. We are trying to do that, trying to recreate the nationalism that what Tamil Nadu has seen. Tamil Nadu has given so many kind of leaders, and Subhash Chandra Bose had the largest number in his army, Indian National Army, from Tamil Nadu, especially from the southern part of Tamil Nadu. So that state is rich with nationalism. But after independence, probably after the Dravidian era has come in, some kind of a separate mindset was in operation in the late part of 60s. Then that developed a kind of a gap between India and Tamil Nadu over a point of time. So Tamil Nadu is a rich nationalist land over a point of time. We want to recreate that, bring back that magic, bring back that feeling, and bring back our old heroes into the daily talking discourse, so that Tamil Nadu will regain its original glory. It's a great state culturally, it is a great state spiritually, it's a great state economically, but it should be a great state nationally also, with a nationalist mindset also, that we are trying to do in a much larger way. And for all the young kids who are part of here, who are doing your education, probably when you try and leave this, you want to do multiple things in life. And I'm very, very sure all of you will get into leadership positions, right or wrong. Any position that you take in any field, be it a social field, be it a political field, any field that you go in, you will see leadership right from day one. And nothing can be offered on a plate, and nothing can be read in a book. It is all, we make mistakes, we learn. But when we read great person's life, and like a Xerox, we could see it gets repeated, one person's life to other. They come out of their comfort zone, they create a band of followers, they sell their vision, they never get affected by success or failure, they keep building one after the other, and then they will never allow their vision to get diluted. Even the circumstances around them gets changed. When we see this happen, we see this happening invariably across everybody's life. And our Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose ji's life is a textbook life. That is why a lot of people say the forgotten hero. But we are very, very glad the last 3-4 years, a lot of national consciousness is getting rebuilt around his life, and a lot of great things are happening. Today, fittingly, our Honorable Prime Minister at 6 o'clock is opening Subhash Chandra Bose life-size statue in the India Gate, at least in 3D hologram today. And very, very soon, we will see the granite block where the whole of country can see him. A very fitting tribute to a great man. So I thank the university for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. And I would just take the questions and answer if there is any question that I've missed it. There's a question which talks about the current set of politics. Have you come across a leader who has the ability to inspire and unite the entire nation? Who has the leadership qualities like Netaji? I think without a doubt, it has to be our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, without a doubt. Because you trace his life, it is always like that. His vision is much bigger. 2014, where he started, that is one way of looking at his life. But we have to go much, much behind. So we have to see 2001, where he started as Gujarat Chief Minister. And that is again one way of looking at his life. If you have to go much, much, much deeper, you got to see in 1985, where he started his life as a pracharak in Gujarat. Gujarat as a state, from how we built a party, and that party was built with a lot of good things in mind, built with equality in mind. The BJP was built with bringing all together in mind. BJP was built with development in mind. 2001 to 14, we have seen what development can do to a state. 14 to 21, we have seen where India is now. So you see, everything is there. Every action is out of his comfort zone. No action was taken by just sitting in his comfort zone. Every action was risky. Many actions were risky. Demonetization was a risky one. GST was a risky one, but the country needed it. He took it. The second, you see, every setback or whatever it is, he is a guy who never bothers about elections. Our prime minister never thinks about making a decision for a particular state, for a particular election mood, so that if we get votes, we get seats. All decisions were made in the larger interest of public, larger interest of country. So that is the second great quality. Out of comfort zone, and he never allowed this vision to get lost. He had a very clear vision for India right from 2014. Is implementing it brick by brick, one after the other. So I see a lot of qualities with our Honorable Prime Minister now. And probably I could say is a reincarnation of the great Subhash Chandra Bose ji also. So that is one way of looking at it. The second question I'm not able to see. Sagarji, if there's any more question to be answered, you have given me only 10 minutes.
Yes, if I may read out one more question, because we are running out of time. So there is one more question.
In the meanwhile, somebody was asking about the names that were spoken from Tamil Nadu. I mentioned two names. One is Mahakavi Subramaniya Bharati. Mahakavi Subramaniya Bharati is a poet, is a writer, who lived a very short life, less than 40 years, who died in 1921. Our Honorable Prime Minister keeps quoting his lines, a very remarkable poet of his time. And second, I mentioned about V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, whom we call VOC, who lived 150 years before. And again, a great guy who started the Swadeshi Navigation Company, who challenged the British by launching his own ship, which was sailing from Tuticorin to Colombo. So he was competing with the Britishers in the high seas, eye to eye. So later they collapsed this company. That's a different argument. So those are the two names I mentioned. Yes, Sagarji, the question that you wanted me to talk.
I think one of the questions that we can generally take is the action plan of Government of India to include the unsung heroes of the freedom movement and other heroes. So basically, what are the efforts that the government is making in basically recollecting these heroes' contributions?
So there's a very important question. There's a very important question. Normally, when you get into this discussion in India, it gets into a very short-term discussion where you say some government is trying to change the textbook, trying to alter the history. But what has happened is, over a point of time, the history is not being right in terms of the perspective in which it is being said. So what I think the BJP is doing, especially Narendra Modi's government is doing, is in a way they're trying to bring out a lot of unsung heroes. Unsung heroes can be brought out in a number of ways in the public consciousness. One of the main way to bring them is to honor each of them in their own way. For example, a hero like Birsa Munda in Jharkhand, it wanted a honorable prime minister. It needed a honorable prime minister to bring that great warrior to the whole of country's consciousness, because a lot of people were limited by their geography. They're kept. I am from Tamil Nadu, so many times I don't even know the great people from northeastern part of India, or some of the great person from Haryana or from Punjab, vice versa. So though India is a very, very unified country for about 75 years, a common textbook, a common pattern of syllabus, but many a times, many of our heroes are very local. We have kept them very locally, and we don't have very, very, very national heroes. Some heroes were projected nationally over a point of time, but some heroes have transcended their space and time. Some leaders have transcended their space and time. So now I believe the government is very consciously bringing a lot of people into national mainstream now. So especially this year, 75 years after independence, this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav it's a great initiative where a lot of great leaders who have fought for independence in their own way. Some leaders must have fought 100 years before independence. They would have laid that seed, but probably that would have materialized 100 years later. But we must have conveniently forgotten. We are trying to bring them out. For example, if I'm talking about leader called Veeramangai Rani Velu Nachiyar, Veeramangai Rani Velu Nachiyar is a warrior prince, a woman warrior from Shivagangai in Tamil Nadu. I'm talking about 250 years before. She took on the East India Company. When she took on the East India Company, refusing to pay the tax, she is the only Indian woman warrior, a local chieftain, who have defeated the East India Company. The first. She was 60 years before Jhansi Rani. And conveniently, we have forgotten. So this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav is a great opportunity for us to bring us to the mainstream. Who is this Rani Veeramanga Velanachiyar? What is she capable? Single-handedly, as a woman, that point of time, you can imagine that India raised an army. She was a local chieftain of a small kingdom, but she was able to protect that kingdom, and she died a natural death. After defeating the East India Company, she lived for 16 years as a ruler of her own kingdom. They couldn't touch. Likewise, there are hundreds of leaders across India, hundreds of leaders. When we dig deep, but their consciousness not there. But when we bring them to the main consciousness, probably the current generation of students, including you, each of their life, we can start bringing a lot of social message, relevant messages. How did they live their life? How did they come out of their comfort zone? Because they all killed their ego over a point of time. For them, the social problem was much bigger than their smallest ego, and they're able to stand up for what is right. That point of time, East India Company was much bigger. They're able to go off ruthlessly one after the other. The British government was able to go ruthlessly one after the other, but a small lady in a small kingdom was able to stand up. And this is an opportunity. Likewise, the great Subhash Chandra Bose. You see, politically, he gets kicked between here and there, but finally, all it wanted was a Narendra Modi ji to announce this day as a Parakram Diwas, so that the next generation of students will truly understand Subhash Chandra Bose in his perspective. Yes, he was not there when we got independent. Doesn't matter. But the active resistance that he put, the strategies that he put in place, the hope that he gave, it's a lesson of study even now. It is not necessary that leaders should be studied only if they're alive during independence. They were there in 1947. Not necessary. A lot of leaders put that seed, maybe in 1900, maybe in 1850, maybe in 1849. But each of the seed, it created the next generation of leaders, which got independence. Unfortunately, our textbook focuses on leaders who were there at that point of time. So that is the single biggest disadvantage for us. That is what the government is trying to set it right now. Sagarji.
Thank you. Can we have one more question?
Sagarji,
can we have time?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. So one of the students of Retd University, Dhawan, a young student who is asking from being the ACP of Bangalore to BJP state president, what are some leadership lessons you want to share from your journey?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think the leadership lesson is very simple. As the DCP Bangalore and now a political leader in Tamil Nadu, generally the word leader within quotation is overemphasized nowadays. I believe in something called more like a follower leadership. In this age and time, when the quality of people with whom you work, you get fantastic quality. You get absolutely highest class of people with great vision. There was a whole time when you talk about leadership means you stand in front of the queue and then you lead them. So I always believe in a follower-centric model where you are a follower to other guy is a follower to you. You keep sharing, you keep giving what you can to him and then what he can to you. And then you all lead yourself together. And there is this very beautiful quote, which I keep remembering, which I keep telling people. Please don't expect me to lead you because I don't have anything special to offer to you. At the same time, please don't expect me to walk behind you because I'm not in any way lesser than you. Let all of us walk together, keep combining our vision and keep going. But of course, in a political party, you have this first among equals. Sometimes you got to make the decision. So that is how I believe we are operating now. And the poll is also, the Polish mindset is generally very steeped in the colonial mindset, a slight British hangover also, where you use punishment to control people. So that is generally in the Indian policing, you see this often. We use punishment to keep that morale. So I never believed in that there also. I always believed you can see the goodness of the other person, and then you can keep them along with you. You can travel along with them. You can motivate them. A hierarchy between a constable and IPS officer is just a hierarchy on a paper. But when we start implementing that in our daily life, I don't believe it will work, because a constable is restricted only by the role he is performing, not by his human ability. He can do fantastic things. He can do great things. He might have some amazing ideas. I believe at a 21-year-old, an IPS officer might have 1/100th of knowledge of a 40-year-old constable, 40-year experienced constable. So when we operate in silos, we might not be able to appreciate the experience, the depth, the life knowledge each person has got. So police, generally this hierarchy is a big problem. In politics, that hierarchy is never a problem because you got to mingle it. So that is one critical shift I have to take from policing to politics. That critical shift of lesser hierarchy. Even police, I was operating like that, so I didn't feel very uncomfortable in taking that shift. Because you all in the future, I think, is more like a leaderless teams. You might have leader, but leader is more about you yourself will determine who will be your leader, not in terms of a position. A manager might say he's a manager, he might say he's a managing director. That could be a position given by somebody, but end of the day, you will decide among yourself who's your leader by his action, by his vision, by the way he talks to you, by the way he motivates you. I think that is the world we are entering, and not necessarily a hierarchical world, not necessarily a world where pedigree and positions will define what it is. So politics is also becoming like that. That's how mass leaders get formed. That's how the history keeps throwing new leaders every time. Narendra Modi ji is like that, from a tea seller. And he's not a leader by pedigree. He's not a leader by position. He came up the hard way. And the nature wanted him. The people wanted him. They pulled him into leadership roles and they're sitting. So even now, he doesn't call himself as prime minister. He calls himself as a Pradhan Sevak, the first Sevak of the country. So I think that is a great leadership lesson for all of us to take from the Honorable Prime Minister also. So for me, in my book, which I've written called The Stepping Beyond Cocky, also I've written, for me, the biggest lesson, the biggest leaders in my life are the constables with whom I worked. Because their 40 years of experience is something, every time you sit with them, you learn so much from them. But every time you allow that hierarchy or the table and the chair between both of you to come in, so many a times you might become a very small leader. You'll be defined only by your pedigree, by your position. But the moment you come out of the table and chair culture, come out of that hierarchy, I think you will have a very enhanced stature, because you will become more like a servant leader, where you keep learning, keep understanding, keep bringing new things that will help you to navigate this tough world. Sagarji?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do we have one more questions, or
yes, Sagarji? Yes, Sagarji, no problem.
Okay. So Sanjam from the Rishiwood University is asking what kind of strategies were being used by Netaji Bose to sell the larger vision to the world. Basically, how did he promote and make such alliances where there was no entity as in India?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, because if we take us back to all of us, the whole group who's sitting here, we'll go back to the Netaji's time. We'll very well understand that India was a very meek world power. India was very meek, very silent, which was propagating the Ahimsa model, and which never had a standing in the world per se. Probably when you take from 1900 onwards, we were under the very clear, the British was ruling us. So we never had a policy of our own. And Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, I think the first thing he did very rightly is he understood the international politics in a much more holistic way. He understood what is happening at the international level, how specifically after the World War I, the international politics has realigned, how the onset of World War II, from 1935-36 onwards, the world was in a continuous one way or the other. 1939 it started till 1945 it went. So Subhash Chandra Bose ji was very, very clear in anticipating which way the world events was moving. And then he was able to position our country very rightly. This is very important, because maybe only Subhash Chandra Bose ji could have done it. He traveled very widely and he had that larger holistic perspective. And second, and one thing is to understand the word, the second is to build alliances. So off and on in our Indian history, we have seen people building alliances. When we look at the great characters in the Indian history, the great Veera Shivaji, the 1600 era, when we see, he tried building an alliance with the British when he was fighting a war with the Aurangzeb and the Bijapur Sultanate at one end. He didn't want to take all of them at one go. Surat, when we went to Pune, when he attacked, he tried to maintain a peaceful conduit with the English who were trying to maintain the trading post. The same thing he tried maintaining with the Portuguese. So every point of time, you see the leaders, they identify who is their enemy number one, and they're very clear who needs to be defeated. They don't want to fight multiple enemies at one stage, because nobody is powerful enough to fight multiple enemies. If you go back to Tipu Sultan also, you would see when he was taking on the British, but he was not taking on the French. So he had a different strategy at different points of time. When you take any Indian leader equivalent to Subhash Chandra Bose dimension at that point of time, you'll always see they always had this diplomatic streak with them. From the world's eyes, Hitler might be seen very differently. From the world's eyes, the Japanese emperor could be seen very differently. From the world's eyes, some other leader in a part of Europe might be seen very differently. But as a leader, you are very, very clear what is your vision. You cannot have multiple enemies at the same time, and you cannot fight multiple wars because you yourself have lost of your vision. So Subhash Chandra Bose was very clear. He had this switch on and switch off mental mode. Maybe the history was not very kind to him because the historians who are writing his history from 1950, they were trying to fit him in that world model. They were trying to fit him into Ahimsa model. They were trying to fit him into the model, how the world has seen the Hitler. They wanted Subhash Chandra Bose ji also to see the Hitler the same way, to see the Japanese emperor the same way, to see the British the same way. It can't happen like that. It cannot happen like that. So that is the first success of Subhash Chandra Bose. The second, he was able to make that powers to believe helping India can help them later. That is fantastic. So be it the submarine, be it the money, be it the resources that he got, where all the leaders were able to see this strong vision, were able to believe in his vision. They believed by helping Subhash Bose, they are helping themselves in the larger political arena that might open up once the World War II ends. Third, but not the least, Subhash Chandra Bose was able to sell his vision top down and bottom up. Because normally when you want a band of followers from across India, a Tamilian who doesn't understand your language, probably a Malayali who doesn't understand your language, or a Bengali, then it's very important that you propagate this vision. One is a top-down vision. From the world power, you are trying to propagate what you're trying to do. From the bottom-up vision, because each of these people have got a vision for India's independence. He was able to merge both beautifully. A top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. He was able to merge both beautifully, and he gave it a shot. It is not necessary that his methods worked at that point of time, but he gave it a shot. And that created a crack in the wall. Like the great military historian who spoke before me, some of the events that he recalled are testimonies to the fact that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose has planned much ahead after independence how the country should go. So we had a very tough time after independence. We never knew where we wanted to go, to follow the socialist model, to follow the Russian 5-year plan, to be an active power or to be a passive power. But Subhash Chandra Bose ji had planned it out in much advance, how India should be in the next 20-25 years. So that's why a man ahead of his time, a man far ahead of his time, was able to convince the world power, convince his band of followers, he able to unite with them, because his band of followers are very clear. When you go for an active route, you know you're going to die. In a passive route, that is not the feeling. In an active route, you know you'll get killed. So he was able to motivate all his followers to stay with him, knowing fully well you are going for a military fight. You are not going to sit in a dharna, not going to sit in a satyagraha. I'm not faulting methods. They're different methods. But his followers have completely united with him, knowing fully well they might die anytime. That's a very big thing. That's a very big thing. They stood with him till the last moment. Those are the greatness of things I see.
Thank you so much, Shri K Annamalai ji, for sharing your journey to leadership and what is the role of leaders in the society at large. And Dhanyavad for taking all these questions from the students and patiently answering each and every one detailedly. Now we request Shri Sanjay Pulipaka ji to give us the concluding remarks for our session. Thank you.
Namaskar. Namaskar, good evening. I hope you can hear me. It is indeed an honor to share this platform with Honorable Minister Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi ji, Lieutenant General Shivane ji, Shri K Annamalai ji, and of course Professor Datta ji and Sagar ji. Let me at the outset thank Rastram Rishihood University for this opportunity to speak on this august occasion of Netaji Jayanti. It is indeed heartening to see an educational institution celebrating Netaji Jayanti with such gutso. From the discussion, it is clearly evident that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose operationalized the values that he believed in, that he talked about. He believed in gender equality, and then we had this Jhansi Rani regiment in the INA shaping up. He believed in celebrating India's diversity. The Indian National Army represented the true diversity of India. There were people from all regions, all religions, all languages, walking shoulder to shoulder to work for India's independence. As many leaders, as speakers pointed out just now, he's a remarkable leader with an ability to propel people beyond their comfort zones in pursuit of larger objectives. As the Honorable Minister pointed out, he raised the nationalist consciousness in the country. He set a new vision. He gave a new mindset when we approached the independence struggle. And of course, he led by example. He was willing to take arduous journeys across continents in pursuit of his political objectives. He traveled by submarines of those days, old days. And not only that, he switched submarines in high seas to travel from Germany to Japan. And then he marched through the jungles of Burma and Thailand. And of course, he took the various risks, and he died in an aircraft crash, or some say he disappeared in an aircraft crash. Either way, all these point out his ability or his willingness to put his life at risk for the larger political objectives. Like many nationalists of those times, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did not believe that there is much difference between colonialism and fascism. And he was not the only leader in India who believed in such that colonialism and fascism are synonyms. There were other political leaders in India's immediate neighborhood who also shared similar attitude. For instance, Bojo Aung San, who was the leader in Burma, he also adopted a similar approach. He worked with the Japanese to overthrow the British. Then when the Japanese are unwilling, he took the help of British to overthrow the Japanese. So therefore, there were many leaders in the region, in Southeast Asia and India, who believed in pitting one evil against the other to achieve the larger independence of India, of their respective countries as well. It is important to recognize that the operations of Indian National Army under the leadership of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose demonstrated security interlinkages between India and Southeast Asia. All through his sojourn in Europe, Netaji pointed out that the political development in India can be impacted through his presence in Asia or the larger East Asian region. Netaji traveled all through Southeast Asia, Singapore, Burma, and reached northeastern borders of India to liberate India. Netaji traveled in some of these countries to gain support for India. He engaged with the local leaders, and he supported the local independence movement struggles as well. It is indeed true, the geopolitical context of the Second World War is different from the geopolitical context that we are living today. Nonetheless, we can raise an important point. Would it be inaccurate to say that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was operationalizing what we call today an Indo-Pacific strategy of his times, tying up from Japan to all other countries in the region? Today, India is pushing back territorial irredentism and authoritarianism of various countries in India's immediate neighborhood. And we should not forget, Netaji always pointed out that Indian democracy and its freedoms are closely tied with developments in Southeast Asia. It is this recognition that is also prompting us to adopt an Indo-Pacific strategy today. Therefore, there are continuities in terms of recognizing geographic spaces on our East and importance they have for securing India and promoting Indian interests. We should also recognize that while Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was an idealist in terms of trying to achieve Indian independence, he was a hard realist in understanding international politics, and he had a very clear understanding about the balance of power dynamic in the international politics. He had a very clinical and a very clear understanding of power politics of major powers, such as Germany, UK, Italy, United States, Japan, and so on. While transnational alliances are important for him, he pointed out that the characteristics of nation states are very important and they should be defined by the people and not by the transnational alliances. To conclude, in my opinion, we should remember that Netaji traveled for larger national good in Afghanistan and various parts of the world across various continents. He traveled as an individual from a society that was colonized, but he always engaged as an equal with all the world leaders. The lesson that we need to learn from Netaji is that we need to frontally engage with power politics and not withdraw from such power politics. Freedom in international politics or in the international realm comes with proactive engagement with power in all its dimensions for larger national good. I thank all the speakers also for raising these issues. Over to you, Sagarji.
Thank you, Shri Sanjay ji, for summarizing our session and giving us the final thoughts on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and why we need to engage with our leaders to understand their role in the society. Thank you all for joining us today on Sunday evening, and we hope to see you again. Thank you all speakers, especially Lieutenant General A B Shivane ji, who have stayed with us over the time and providing key inputs. Shri K Annamalai ji for addressing us for so long and giving us the inputs on each and every questions. I would like to also thank Srimati Meenakshi Lekhi ji for giving us the input as a chief guest. And Sanjay ji for concluding remarks on Bose, on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Jai